Hi, everyone. It's Dr. Akala Kamaat coming at you today. I hope everyone's healthy, beautiful souls, and that you're happy. Just want to take a deep breath. Take another deep breath. And one more deep breath. As we center the intention on this live stream right now, I just ask spirit guides, ancestors, the cosmos, be able to allow me the expressive means to communicate something of importance, not just to me, but I ask that it resonate with individuals who need this message. Yeah? And that I say the right words. Give me the right words. Thank you. You know, before I get started, I just want to say it's been a little bit of a rocky road for me these last 2-3 weeks since my father passed away. And I've been trying to navigate it. You know, I have changed or transformed so in my spiritual walk that many of those that I call family based on blood, over the years, based on my choices to go get a PhD and the pursuit of the relocations that entailed, you know, those connections began to wither, and they've withered. And so it's just been interesting to be in this space of spiritual awakening, understanding that some entities had to be released, and knowing that now in this situation, this period of grief, that those bloodlines, I don't have that, right? And many times as we are awakened, you know, there are changes in the composition of our networks. My cat's about to fall off the counter. Get your behind down here. My cat, Morpheus. That we have to sit in some of what feels like isolation and navigate that in faith that you have made the right decision to release entity components that really were very low vibrational, low frequency, and that really showed you over time, and you finally believed it, that they really did not care for you or support you. That realization and the realization of not having those connections in this time, while I'm not trying to go back and recreate the mess, the chaos, it is sort of a melancholy type of feeling to sit in, to be in, when something so transformational, such as someone transitioning from a corporal life to a spirit life, like immediate family wise, you know, that happens. So it's been a little shaky for me and doing these posts, and I used to post a lot, and I have just been trying to get the energy, or allowing the energy, yes, allowing, instead of fighting and forcing, allowing the energy to do what's necessary at this time. I can understand it, I can release it, recognizing, recognition, and then releasing as much as I can over and over and over again. So look, the spiritual awakening walk, it comes with the great and it comes with the interesting, right? And we have to accept it, and we can't cry over awakening. because like when I was awakened in religion, once my eyes opened completely, I could not close them again. And I'm sort of like one of those individuals who can't be fake, much to my chagrin, right? I would like to be fake. I mean, because that seems, I would have liked to, right? To be fake, to fake the funk. I just can't do it. I can't. That's why I'm allergic to going into these systems that are empowered by people who don't look like me, because it's like an allergic feeling. And that's why right now I don't have any money, right? So you can't cry over over your awakening, what you don't have, because that left for a good reason. And you moved and transformed in ways that are fantastic. But you have to understand, in that spiritual awakened state, that walk can be extremely challenging when you know what you can and what you cannot do, and you take a stand. And then when situations like this happen, a death of someone, a transition of someone you really care about, you begin to question everything. That's natural. And we can't beat ourselves up because of that, and we can't think there's something wrong with us because we're questioning. But don't make any moves. You just sit and see as much as you can, so you can hear and discern whatever the cosmos, your God, Jehovah, wants to provide to you to move forward this interesting energetic space. All right. So, hi, everybody. Welcome, beautiful souls. I ask you to please comment if something resonates. I ask you to like if you're on this video more than 3 minutes. 3 minutes. And I ask you to subscribe. You know, look, I'm trying to grow a channel here, and I need support from people who are even watching this a little bit. So, if you're still watching that little monologue, hit like and subscribe. And you can get notifications of when I'm monologuing again. But today we're here, right? Because I want to talk about mistaking the cage for the world, and how the conditioning that broke white humanity is still running. You know, it's interesting how I came to this idea of conditioning the white consciousness, right? Because everything is always about Blacks internalized racism, Blacks are conditioned, everybody else is conditioned, but nobody ever really situates how that is, other than me, for African Americans, because that was my body of research as an academic for 25 years. Okay, so I know a lot about Black folks conditioning and other folks conditioning, white folks conditioning, other ethnic groups conditioning, acculturation, socialization, and all that stuff. But very seldom are there presentations that talk about the ways that white people's humanity has been mangled and gnarled in such a way that they are oblivious, willfully participating, or question, what did I do? Right? It's always, we don't talk about those things, and we don't talk about white characteristics, so to speak, in regards to Black people. Okay, they like music, they like to party, they like colors, they like to do their hair, jewelry, flamboyant, bodacious sometimes, you know, got rhythm, and we can cook, and we like spice. Those are some of the things. I talk a lot about the good stuff. But we don't necessarily hear about what white people are. That's another discussion to get into characteristics. And I'm going to do that. This Feel the Power of Release series right here on It's going to be on Sunday. I made a mistake and did it again on Monday. Well, the Sunday, this is a Sunday series, right? This is going to run for 6 weeks until Juneteenth, right? We end this on Juneteenth, which I think is important. But we're going to do another series after this that deals with the Black light, focusing in on melanin and Blackness, okay? And it's taken from my journey in the power of release, journeying from a closed fist to an open hand, the Black light. And I've been wanting to get into this for a while. I wasn't sure exactly how. I know that it's going to turn some people off. I don't care. Others talk about pseudoscience, but the Black light will be another Feel the Power of Release series, the Black Light series. And that will start after Juneteenth. And that should be a very interesting conversation in regards to spirituality, because I get into characteristics that are unique to white Americans. And I think this is important because, again, as I said, often we don't focus on how white people's humanity has been broken. And I'm not saying all, but from my experience, which is my experience, most of the Black white people I interacted with, their humanity was questionable. Okay? And so I do think it is important in regards to spirituality to talk about how they are in a cage, how they mistake their cage for the world. And I'm not sure how much pushback I will get, if any, on this topic of white people's conditioning, because they think many times they are unique and don't have the capacity to be conditioned, because as my research has shown, they are the axis around which everything revolves in our society. Whiteness, white power and privilege is the axis around which everything revolves. So many times white folks don't see themselves as being affected. They see themselves as affecting, right? So if we are living in that type, especially when our humanity is being diminished and dimmed, what type of spiritual journey does that really create or make way for? And is that spiritual journey actually anything authentic if they themselves are conditioned to believe that everything revolves around them, even if they don't believe that to be true? That's another level of conditioning, okay? The idea that's not true. I mean, Black folks feel the funk, so we can understand we're being impacted and the ways in which folks have been conditioned, because we can look through history, right? On the other hand, many white folks are comfortable. That's why you got so many low-income white people who are jumping onto MAGA, because they feel like they've been left behind. And maybe they have. I'm sure they have. And many people have been left behind, right? So they may not think the world revolves around them. They just want their piece of the pie. By any means necessary. Adopting the Malcolm X attributed quote, by any means necessary. That's not other people. That is the way in which they are moving. And so, as I mentioned before, racism and racist ideology and supporting and not believing you're supporting, it's all a spiritual malady, because it removes you from your core. Who the heck are you? Right? It removes you from seeing you. There is like a buffer zone between the external ascribed identities next to our avowed identities, right? And that's the identity that we are, or the identity we create for ourselves outside of the social system. There's a buffer there, and that's the conditioning, right? The conditioning removes them and removes many people who are conditioned, and that's everybody, except for some people who've done the work to understand, and we're still digging ourselves out of that conditioning because it will pop up. But it is a spiritual malady. And in the power of release recognition phrase, it becomes all the more critical to recognize, because look, I wrote a whole book that talked about diversity, equity, inclusion. I never believed in it. I was a diversity hire 2 times, 3 times, right? And it was a fiasco. And DEI was all a lie. It's a stupid label. It makes no sense to me. They should have got rid of that crap. I don't think they should get rid of the idea of equity, right? And making things fair, but it should not be called DEI because it sounds special. This is not special. This is live and let live and provide these salutogenic conditions that everyone can thrive. Pathogenic, salutogenic, path is bad, salu's good, right? The DEI I always had a disdain for it. And if people come back around the corner after all this crap is over, and hopefully, at that point, we are really moving into the 5th dimensional sort of collectivist stance and being and worldview and framework. But if there is a way that this is kind of fixed, if people come back around with DEI, I think, and yes, I am awakened, but I think I'm going to have to fight somebody. You get my book, Ivory Tower Hypocrisy, edition 2, and you will see that whole DEI BS, because it never got to the cage. It never got to the conditioning. It always made it seem like, oh, you have to help these people. Oh, you got to be open. The very foundation and the way DEI is the foundation is fundamentally flawed. And that will be another discussion. Yeah. I kind of got my PhD over here. So I'm not here to talk about DEI. All right. So welcome, everyone. Welcome, beautiful souls. I'm so glad you're here. And yes, I talk a little bit because just trying to give folks opportunity to come on in. I keep doing these lives on faith, cosmic faith, in synergy with the divine intelligence that it will resonate with someone somewhere. So I just keep doing, regardless of who's here and who's not. I'm here, and I got something to say after years and decades of silence. So, and I want to begin today by asking you to be present in this moment, right here, right now. Not history, not the past. I got my notes. I want you to be right here, right now, in this moment. Because right now, in the United States, Black and brown people are being rounded up in coordinated operations across the country. That's no surprise, right? Families are being separated. People are being held in facilities that lawyers, journalists, human rights investigators have described as brutal, degrading, and in some cases, as bearing the hallmarks of what historians call concentration camps. Overcrowded, dehumanizing, designed not just to detain, but to break. Okay? And right now, people are dying. They're dying in those facilities. People are being denied medical care. People are being held without due process. And the majority of white America is watching. The majority of white America is watching this happen and feeling, at most, mildly uncomfortable. There's a faction that are actively pushing back, but the majority of white Americans watching. And right now, 2 white Americans who went to stand with people being targeted, who used their bodies and voices to say this is wrong, were shot. And let me be precise about what that means. They did not threaten anyone. They were not armed. They were present. They were witnesses. They were standing on the side of basic human dignity. And the response of the system, shoot them. I want you to hold all of that right now. And if you need to share this video with someone who you know, please share it. Because today, I'm not going to talk about this as a political issue. I'm going to talk about it as what it actually is. The live operation of a conditioning system that has been running in white America for 400 years. And once you see the architecture, the infrastructure, once you recognize how this was built, you cannot unsee it. And if this is triggering to anyone right now, I ask you to put the video aside and maybe watch it with someone. Okay? If you're still here listening to this, I ask you to like the video and click subscribe. Okay? But I'm just getting to the real mechanisms here. So please journey on with me. So to understand what is happening right now in this country, you have to understand how it was prepared, how this country was prepared. Because what we are watching today did not begin today. It was made possible by centuries of deliberate psychological engineering. And I'm going to say psychological semantic engineering. Because remember, it all gets in the body. And here is the central claim I want you to hold throughout this live stream session. You cannot participate in the dehumanization of another group of people without first having something broken in yourself. I will repeat that again. My central claim I want you to hold throughout the session: you cannot participate in the dehumanization of another group of people without first having something broken in yourself. The capacity to watch human beings suffer, to watch children separated from their parents or accompanying their mothers to a detention camp and not having clean food or adequate water to drink. Clean water and adequate food to eat. To watch people rounded up like livestock and feel nothing, or to feel that it is justified, or to feel that the people asking you to care are the real threat. That capacity does not come naturally. It has to be installed. I remember in religion, they said I was born with sin. First of all, there is no sin, but that's another live stream. I was born, and every piece of junk society could pour into me was poured into me. It was installed, and that's how I came to know myself, and how you come to know yourself. Many, many, many folks in America. Okay, and so in white America, it was installed deliberately over centuries through interlocking mechanisms that were designed to suppress the most basic human instinct, the recognition of a shared humanity. That is spiritual. The recognition of a shared humanity. So, mechanism one, All right. What's that? Theology. God authorized cruelty. Okay. So the first mechanism is religious. Okay. The so called curse of Ham, I'm sure many folks may have heard about this. Black folks sure know how it was used. Okay. Ham was used for centuries to give the enslavement of African people the authority of scripture. Okay. The civilizing mission, quote unquote, the claim that European conquest and African enslavement were spiritual gifts to inferior peoples, framed unprecedented violence as Christian charity. Okay? When you believe your cruelty is God's will, you do not experience it as cruelty. You're experiencing it as righteousness. The theological mechanism did not justify racial hierarchy. It cauterized the conscience. Cauterized. I think burnt the conscience. I like the word cauterized. That makes it so powerful. Cauterized the conscience. It made white Americans indifference to Black suffering feel not like a moral failure, but like moral obedience. Makes a lot of sense. I've actually seen that religious stuff happen, in my own home. So, yes, that's real. And so, this teaching of the so called curse of Ham was preached from pulpits across the country, woven into denominational doctrine, and has never been fully reckoned with by the institutions that delivered it. Second mechanism, law and science, the system certified it. So the second mechanism gave dehumanization the authority of government and empirical truth. Empirical truth is, did you see it? It rests on this phrase. If a tree falls in the forest and no one sees it, did it actually fall? This was the quintessential question in my training, my beginning training as a research scientist. Ask yourself and answer that. If a tree falls in the forest without anyone there to witness it, did the tree fall? Let me know your answer. Put that in the chat if you're here. Put it in the chat. Let me know your answer, because that answer will say a lot about your worldview and your ontology, right? Okay. And so the second mechanism is law and silence. It gave dehumanization the authority of government and empirical truth. Okay. The 3/5 compromise encoded into the founding document of this nation. The legal position that Black people were not fully persons. Black codes and Jim Crow laws criminalized Black existence and normalized Black restriction as legal, necessary, and just. And the race science, many of you don't even know what that is. Race science, the science that supported racism. Phrenology, intelligence testing designed to confirm Black inferiority. The entire apparatus of 19th and 20th century scientific racism. It gave white Americans what theology had given them, but with laboratory credentials. Okay. The system was not just morally permitted, it was scientifically validated. And together, law and science told white Americans, you are not doing anything wrong. Your conscience can rest. And on that note of government and science, with the advent of, in particular, ancestry.com, where you can find out your genealogy, when ancestry.com was really pumping itself out into the social conscious of America, they would show results. And every white person I saw on that show had blackness in them, African in them. Many, all. It seems like almost all white people have, based on genetic science, African American DNA in them, African DNA in them. So when we talk about the government and the 3/5 compromise, is that portion of their African genealogy part of that 3/5 compromise? If you think so, write it in the comments. In the comments, because the 3/5 compromise was, if you're 3/5 black, you're done. I don't even know how they did that. Did they have a dropper test? You're 3/5? I don't know, right? But you could still look white and still have African genetic material in your DNA. So how does that resonate with the 3/5 law? If you have a comment, I suggest you write it in the chat. Does that make sense? And I can never see the chat. Okay. All right. And so I'm going to say on that note that ancestry.com stopped showing anybody's genetic makeup in the commercials. Okay. So mechanism 3, culture, dehumanization as entertainment. So the third mechanism is cultural. Okay. Minstrelsy. Back in the day, the dominant form of American popular entertainment was, through the most of the 19th and 20th centuries, installed a template of Black dehumanization at the level of reflex, okay? Bypassing critical thought entirely. It taught white Americans that Black people were, it taught white Americans what Black people were before they had any direct experience with them. And then the blackface, Al Jolson and Step and Fetch, and taught white Americans who we were, even before they may have had any direct experience with a Black person. Propagated. And we know the stereotypes propagated, gorilla, and all these other horrible things, ape, and just, okay. So, Birth of a Nation. I remember when I was introduced to that film as an undergrad at NYU. Birth of a Nation screened at the White House. And for those of you who don't know Birth of a Nation, you need to see it. There could be a colorized version now, but you have to see it. That was like Avatar, the first Avatar, or that was like Independence Day, these blockbuster movies back in the day, right? Armageddon, right? All these movies. It was, it was like, this is wonderful. So see Birth of a Nation. Ideally the original version, the black and white version. It depicted Black men as savage predators, right? And the KKK, that stands for Ku Klux Klan, as heroes. It sparked a resurgence of Klan membership. After that movie, everybody wanted to be a Klan's member, to be a righteous hero. Okay? And the membership grew by millions, okay? It was not fringe back then. It was the highest celebrated American cinema of its era, as I said, blockbuster. And then And I have to go back some because even though I didn't write it in here, this third idea of culture, dehumanization as entertainment. I mean, Harriet Washington discussed this in her book, Medical Mistreatment. It's a thick book. It was groundbreaking when she wrote it, but she talked about the circuses or the zoos where white people would come to look at Africans, black people, um, like a zoo. It would be behind cages, families, different types of people. Venus, a Hottentot, with Sarah Bartman. She was a black woman. This was in Europe, though. Wasn't here, but her butt, her lips, her breasts, her genitalia were all objects of fascination. And when she died, they cut those parts off of her and put them in a museum. And so those zoos for black folks, the culture, that's part of the culture. Okay. Give me 1 second. Hold on 1 second. I got somebody at my door. It's probably my son. Hold on. Oh, no, he's knocking for no reason. Forgive me. I'm going to have to edit that out. So that's minstrelsy, but this went back way further than this. Dehumanization as entertainment. When we look back at chattel slavery with black women, I mean, dehumanization as entertainment, just raping, having sex with kids, men, women who were slaves just because they could. It was fun, right? So it was built in dehumanization as entertainment. And then there's lynching. And, my shero, Ida B. Wells was a black woman back then who would document all the lynchings. She was an advocate for stopping this. She traveled all around the world to gain support in stopping the lynching of black Americans. And so between 1877 and 1950, more than 4,000 black people were lynched in American South. But it was happening all across America. These were not secret acts. These were public events attended by families, photographed with the lynched body, made into postcards of the lynched body with the white person smiling with their kid and their wife. And these postcards were mailed through the United States postal system. People bought their children. Newspapers announced the events in advance. It sort of reminds me of, back in the day, when in England, when they would have those beheadings and hangings for public spectacle. Yeah, that was here. But it wasn't hanging any of them. It was hanging black Americans. And they would hang a black man and cut his penis off. I still don't understand. I mean, I can understand. I have seen the research, but that is just very strange. Okay? That is dehumanization, as Trump would say, 500,000%. What does it take to bring your child to watch a human being being tortured and killed? What has to be broken in a person, in a community, in a culture for that to be a family outing? It requires the complete suppression of the capacity to recognize another person's suffering as suffering. I've talked about this as the soulless, emotionally dead, emotional death, okay? Very tied to the third dimensional reality in which we live. And that is really being unveiled now that we're in the bridge phase of the fourth dimension, bridge phase, prior to moving into the fifth dimension phase of a new collectiveness, a new collectivist worldview or framing in America. So it requires the complete suppression of the capacity to recognize another person's suffering as suffering. A humanity so thoroughly conditioned that it can stand in front of death and feel nothing but pleasure and belonging. This is not a description of quote unquote monsters, although that term has been applied. This is a description of what conditioning does to people over generations. This is the cost of the system paid by everyone inside of it. That's a lot to carry. And, for those that are watching now or coming to this later, I described a lot and I want to know what is moving in you. What is coming up right now for you? What do you recognize? What question just surfaced that you have never asked before? Take a moment and put it in the comments, even if it's just a word, something. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much. What I just described did not end all of that behavior, okay? It evolved. The formal structures changed. Slavery ended, legal segregation ended. But the psychological architecture that made those systems possible did not dismantle themselves, okay? It adapted, it reproduced in a new way, okay? It found new targets to include with the old targets, new justifications, new language. And today in 2026, it is operating in plain sight. This is the bridge phase, 4D phase, operating in plain sight because we need to question this and get rid of this. That's why. In order to be collectivist, we need to get rid of this individualistic racist BS. Okay? So I want to put history and present the present side by side, because when you see them together, you cannot pretend this is new. Okay? So here we have the first, dehumanizing language. This is then made black people less than human in white imagination before any direct encounter. Savage, animal, subhuman, words that prepared the conscience for what the body was about to do. Now, dehumanizing language prepares the conscious today. Illegal, invasion, infestation, vermin, animals. These are not descriptions. These are instructions. They are telling the conditioned mind what category of being it is looking at and what that category permits. Here we go again. The then enslaved people and later African Americans under Jim Crow were rounded up under legal cover, fugitive, slave laws, vagrancy statutes, convict leasing, held in brutal conditions, denied due process, and disappeared from their communities with the full authority of the state. Now, Black and brown people are being rounded up in coordinated operations across this country, held in facilities that human rights investigators, legal observers, and members of Congress who have attempted to visit have described as brutal, overcrowded, and deliberately degrading. People are dying. People are being denied medical care, food, water, sleeping quarters, bathrooms. They're being denied due process because it's either denied or delayed, and it is happening with the full authority of the state. Lynching, last one. Lynchings were public, photographed, celebrated. The community's silence, its willingness to attend, to mail the postcards, to read the newspaper announcements was the mechanism of enforcement. Silence was participation. And now, the mass detentions and brutal treatment of Black and brown people today depends on the same mechanism, the willingness of a sufficient number of white Americans to look away, to feel it is unfortunate but necessary, to reach for justifications that sound different from they are not fully human, but function identically. identically. And so I want to name something that is almost never named clearly. That's part of the recognition revisioning. What is happening in those detention facilities right now is not a policy failure. It is not an oversight. It is not a bureaucratic insufficiency. It is the deliberate infliction of suffering on people who have been placed outside the circle of recognized humanity. It is the theological, legal, and cultural mechanisms we just discussed operating together in 2026. And here is the part that should stop every one of us cold. The majority of white America is watching this happen and not feeling it as a moral emergency. This is not because white Americans are uniquely cruel, although there are some schools of thought that believe that is part of their makeup as a people, as a Caucasoid peoples. Okay, it is not an oversight. Oh, it should stop every one of us cold. They're watching it happen and they're not feeling it as a moral emergency. This is not because they're uniquely cruel. As I said, some schools of thought would argue that point. It is because the conditioning is working exactly as designed. The displacement of responsibility. I didn't create the policy. I didn't vote for it. The diffusion. The whole society is complicit. What can one person do? The dehumanization of the target. They come here legally. There are consequences. The mythology of law and order as inherently just. The same mythology that made the Black codes feel reasonable to the people who lived under them. The comfort of not knowing has been replaced by the comfort of not looking. The information is available. The images exist. The testimony of survivors, lawyers, and investigators is on the record. But the conditioned mind has powerful tools for not allowing that information to land as what it is. Cognitive dissonance, perhaps. And the most powerful of those tools is the belief that people are asking, and the most powerful of those tools is the belief that the people asking you to look are the real problem. People saying, look at this. The people telling them to look at this, that person saying, look at this, that person's the problem. Okay. So, every advance in the recognition of Black and brown humanity has been met by white backlash, framed as self-defense. This is not a new observation. It is a documented pattern. Reconstruction ended because white Southerners and their Northern sympathizers experienced Black political participation as an attack on the natural order. The civil rights movement was opposed by people who genuinely believed they were protecting their communities. Each expansion of recognized humanity toward people previously excluded from it has been met with the claims, we're the ones being harmed, we're the victims. The pattern is running today. Every person who says this is wrong, who names the detention centers for what they are, who stands in solidarity with people being targeted, who refuses to look away, is told that they are the threat. Hence the shooting of those two white protesters. And so that if you tell them to look or stand in solidarity with protesters, you're called an American, radical, and dangerous. And then two white Americans who went to stand with people being targeted, who used their bodies and their voices in the protest to say this is wrong, shot. I want to say clearly what this is. That is the system reminding everyone what happens when you refuse the conditioning. It is not random. It is not an isolated incident. It was the enforcement mechanism operating as it has always operated, with violence against those who break ranks. This is what happened to white abolitionists in the antebellum South. This is what happened to white civil rights workers in the 1960s. Viola Liuzzo murdered on a highway in Alabama because she drove Black voters to the polls. Andrew Goodman and Michael Schwerner, I may be messing up these last names, killed in Mississippi alongside James Chaney because they tried to register Black voters to vote. The system has always known that its greatest vulnerability is white Americans who choose their humanity over racial conditioning. I'm going to say that again. The system knows its greatest vulnerability is white Americans who choose their humanity over their racial conditioning. And it has always responded to that choice with punishment. When two white Americans were shot for standing on the side of human dignity, the message to every white American is unmistakable. This is what it costs to refuse the conditioning. This is what the cage does when you try to walk out of it. And this situation has been allowed for centuries. Not by monsters, although that is contested by some, but ordinary people who were conditioned not to see it, or conditioned to see it and not care, or conditioned to believe that what they were doing was necessary or legal or God's will, or simply the way things are. Every mechanism I named in this historical record is operating right now. The only question is what you do with that recognition. I would open the floor for comments, but since I am sharing this with the ether, cyberspace ether, if you have comments, put something in there in the comments, okay? Right now, I want to talk about where this work actually begins, because most people, when they encounter what we just discussed, get stuck in two places. They either go into overwhelm, right? The scale is so vast, so historical, so entrenched that it feels impossible to move. Or they go into a kind of outrage that produces noise but not change. Both of these responses are understandable as they are. Allow the system to continue operating. Basically, overwhelm paralyzes, outrage without clarity exhausts. The system is very good at producing both. The entry point of the power of release is not the outrage, okay? It is recognition. And recognition is more demanding than it sounds, because it requires you to turn the same clear gaze inward that we just turned on the historical record. So what does recognition in this instance require? The system we just described, look, it does not only operate out there in policy and history, it operates inside each of us in the beliefs we hold about who is fully human, whose suffering counts, what we are allowed to feel, and what it costs to refuse the conditioning. For white Americans in the room right now, recognition includes questions like these. When I see images of the detention facilities, and my first impulse is to reach for justification. They came here legally. There are processes. This is complicated. Am I thinking clearly? Or am I reaching for the same mechanisms that made the Black codes feel reasonable to the people who lived under them? When the two white Americans were shot at the protest, and my first feeling was something other than horror, what was that feeling? Where did it come from? Who taught me to feel that or not to feel that? When I feel that people are calling this a moral emergency, when I feel that they're being extreme or divisive or political, what is that response protecting? These are not rhetorical questions for white Americans. They are the beginning of the work. First, where did I first receive this belief? Whatever belief is activated now, right now, about who deserves protection, about what is extreme, about what the law means, when did you first receive it? How old were you? What was the environment? Because if you can locate the installation, you can begin to experience it as something happening to you rather than a truth about the world. Second question, does this belief make my body expand or contract? This is a somatic test. White Americans, you bring this belief into your body right now. Does your chest open or close? Does your breath deepen or go shallow? Does the belief give you access to more of yourself, to your full feeling, your full moral perception? Or does it require you to shut something down? Third question, who benefits from me believing this? Every belief was installed in a context. Every belief serves someone. White Americans, ask yourself honestly, who benefits from sufficient numbers of white Americans believing that the detention of Black and brown people is unfortunate but necessary? Who benefits from white Americans believing that people who stand up and protest are the real threat? Who benefits from the widespread belief that none of this is our responsibility? The answer to the question is not abstract, it is concrete. It has names and institutions and political interests. And when you can name it clearly, you can begin to see your own beliefs as the political instruments they were designed to be, rather than as your own conclusions. Seeing the mechanism is not the same as being helpless to it. Recognition is the first act of refusal. When you can see the cage, when you can stop mistaking the cage for the world, you have already begun to step outside of it. I want to say this clearly. This work is not separate from what is happening politically. The internal work of recognizing your conditioning and the external work of standing against these systems are not two different things. They are the same movement. You cannot stand clearly and even spiritually against something you are still inside of. And if you cannot get outside of it, and you cannot get outside of it without recognizing what is there. You know, the two white Americans who were shot went to that protest because in them, something in them had already refused the conditioning, right? Something had refused it. They had already asked on some level, consciously or not, who benefits from my silence? And they had chosen at cost to themselves not to be silent. That choice begins inside, and it begins with recognition. If anything has shifted inside of you, you're sitting with something, you're going to do something different tonight, and out of this live stream, please share it in the comments. But before I let you go, I want to make you an offer. If tonight landed somewhere specific in you, if you recognized a belief that you had never questioned, if you felt something shift, white Americans, and how you understand what is happening in this country and why, if you are sitting with a question about what is yours and what was installed, that is exactly the work I do in private session. One session, we locate what you are carrying. We trace it. We trace where it came from. We begin the work of separating your signal from the conditioning, from the voices that told you who was human, who deserved protection, who was permitted, and what it costs to see clearly. This work is not separate from what is happening in the world. It is the foundation of what it takes to stand clearly inside of it and to journey through spiritually awake, because that has to overlay over recognition on some level. It's a spiritual move all the way around. And then politically, that spiritual journeying needs to situate itself there too. I didn't say religious, spiritual. And so right now, your first session with me is 75% off. If you'd like to explore these questions in a private session, use a spring code. Use a code Spring Surprise, all caps. Spring Surprise, no spaces between the words, at checkout. This offer ends June 20th, and it is for new clients only. The booking link will be in the description below. Look, the cage only holds the people who cannot see it. That is why the recognition phase is the beginning of everything. I will see you in the next episode. I'm Dr. Akila Kamaat, and this is Feel the Power of Release. Take care of yourself. Thank you.